Right, so if we move back then to item 4 on the agenda, which is the update around the antisocial behaviour. And before we get into that, again, just in the context of the police and crime plan, it is a priority within there. It is something that the public feel strongly about, and it's very high up in terms of the public feedback that we do get, and from our partners as well. Around 60% of people who responded to the your priorities, your plan connected to the police and crime plan formulation survey said that the reducing ASB clearly was important to them, 60%. So we continually try and work with partners around this agenda. And also the Safer Communities Fund, I would sort of mention in particular, has actually awarded nearly £1 million of that funding over the last few years into areas of antisocial behaviour or projects dealing with antisocial behaviour or some connection to it. So that's a really important connection into the Safer Communities Fund. And obviously I do try and get round each of our community safety partnerships, and I was at the Kirklees partnership very recently because I still continue to passport some significant funding back to each community safety partnership, and much of that funding is then used by them in terms of partnership responses to antisocial behaviour. So again, it's just important to give that background. So I'll now ask for an update on your report. Thanks. So
the report outlines the force's current position then in relation to antisocial behaviour. It touches on examples of work undertaken in partnership to effectively tackle antisocial behaviour across the 5 districts. It touches on our governance around ASB. It also gives an overview in terms of legislation and the consolidation of policing powers around ASB. It touches on the local structure, our current delivery model, recorded incidents, and also we've featured public perception and satisfaction within the report as well. And to conclude, we'll talk about our future approach as we go forward. So, Catherine.
Okay, so we bring fairly regular updates, I think, on antisocial behaviour, so if it's okay, I'm going to go through the report and just pull out what I think are the exceptions in terms of updates, rather than read the whole thing out to people. So, as you know, we have technology that assists us with this area of work, given that it is a high volume area, and our antisocial behaviour analyst tool, ASBAT, is used to help us identify risk and vulnerability in terms of antisocial behaviour across the neighbourhoods. And the neighbourhood profiler also is something which can give neighbourhood teams real-time information about antisocial behaviour. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you were...
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
No.
I thought we were different reports.
No.
Okay. So in terms of governance then, obviously antisocial behaviour in general comes in via the Force Contact Centre, and we use Storm and Corvus, which are our police computer systems, to monitor monthly management information which each district gets in terms of antisocial behaviour, which lets us know about the volume and types of incidents that we are dealing with and which the public are experiencing. Also we monitor victim user satisfaction, which you've already touched upon, as has Russ in his introduction. The Crime and Policing Act now has obviously been in for 4 or 5 years, implemented 4 years ago, and so I think everybody is familiar with the reduction of the 19 powers down to 6, which were given to us during that Act, and the fact that that change also consolidated and simplified the law for local involvement, which includes community remedies, which is where the victim can have a say in the punishment of the offender, and also the ASB case review, which is more commonly referred to as the community trigger. where victims can activate a multi-agency review of their case if they don't feel like something's been resolved to their satisfaction. And we work closely with the local authorities to make sure that legal advice is sought to make sure that best evidence is achieved, which means now that we don't have long delays in terms of achieving criminal behaviour orders. We used to have that, and we've tightened up on that now, which is helpful, and we're being creative with how we use those. So in terms of the local structure, ASB remains something that is dealt with within the districts and is very much a focus of the neighbourhood policing teams and the local PCSOs. We work in partnership with local authorities and other relevant agencies, including housing, to tackle antisocial behaviour across those 5 areas. And wherever possible, we co-locate with partners to make sure that that information sharing and understanding about what's happening in a street and a place is as rich as it can be. Referrals come into our antisocial behaviour hubs from lots of different places, some of which I've just mentioned, and our ASB link officers will take ownership of some of the more serious and complex cases, leaving the partnership working area staff, whether they be PCSOs or housing officers, to help in resolving some of the lower level or emerging issues. And via the local accountability meetings, we regularly visit the problem-solving occurrences that are present in locations, not just around antisocial behaviour, but around other persistent neighbourhood problems, to make sure that staff are in partnership, problem-solving and hopefully preventing an issue from carrying on happening in the future. In Leeds and Wakefield, there's a pilot taking place where student officers identify a problem and then work with the MPTs, which I think is, very often we think of our neighbourhood policing team officers as the officers who problem solve, but we want all of our officers to do that and have that mindset when they're out and about. And that's difficult sometimes when our officers are busy and are 24/7, because they very often don't build up those same relationships with communities. So in Leeds and Wakefield at the moment, some of the student officers, whilst they are still doing the 24-hour policing, work with their MPTs, identify a problem, and then work with the MPTs to try and solve that problem, to try and give them an idea about what problem solving and good problem solving looks like. We've provided lots of awareness sessions to social landlords on antisocial behaviour to let them know what we expect from them in terms of their responsibilities, especially around the cannabis farm issue within houses that pop up from time to time, and landlords will sometimes be unaware of that happening within their property. In terms of current delivery then, obviously it's a key part of the policing crime plan of yours, and it's taken really seriously by us, and especially embedded as part of our neighbourhood policing footprint. There are a number of examples in the report about some good problem solving that's been done in terms of antisocial behaviour at Leeds, in Bradford, Calderdale. We've also got specifically at Wakefield, there's quite an issue and has been for some time in terms of off-road bikes and quad bikes. So we have off-road motorcyclists across all the districts, but they do concentrate their efforts over at Wakefield, and at Bradford they're part of the steerside enforcement team. Clearly for a Bradford district, in terms of antisocial behaviour, antisocial behaviour and driving are very much linked and have been for a while. That steerside team since June 2018 have delivered 62 operations across the district, and there's some results within there which I think are really a testament to the team being out and about, seizing vehicles and stopping people for antisocial behaviour and driving. Just to touch upon, going back to Wakefield again, and the increased number of incidents involving the illegal use of motorbikes and scooters and quad bikes, etc. We've piloted the use of selected DNA within Wakefield, and this is a fairly recent thing that we've done, but what that helps us do is when we've got a good idea of who somebody is, but clearly from a health and safety point of view, if you're a PCSO, it's very difficult to start running around after people on scrambler bikes and quad bikes. we can spray them with a substance as they pass the PCSOs, which then enables us to go and arrest people or ask people to come in for voluntary attendance at some point, but they should still have that staining on their person or their clothing, which helps us prove that they've been in a particular location at particular times. That, alongside other concentrations at Wakefield, we've seen a reduction from 350 to about 20 in convictions. And I know that a lot of the work the neighbourhood team have done there has increased public confidence around the way that we've tackled those off-road bikes. In terms of recorded incidents then, we've shown a continued reduction in the number of ASB incidents, about just short of a 13% reduction across West Yorkshire, which is 7,600 fewer incidents than reported in 2018. Each of the 5 districts has reported reductions, so there's not one particular place that's standing out above other things. When we break that down by incident type, the kind of things that seem to be falling are traveller nuisance, youth nuisance, fireworks, snowballing and adult nuisance as well. And we've seen slight increases in littering and neighbourhood-related incidents, but they are fairly slight in comparison to in numbers and proportionality. In terms of public perception and satisfaction, we've remained fairly static, a very slight increase in our satisfaction rates, but it is only slight. There's been a slight reduction in satisfaction with ease of contact. That would be around the 101 number that people are trying to get through, and obviously we're trying to promote to people as best we can the online ways of contacting the police so that we can pass the information through to the neighbourhood teams. And being kept informed of progress as well, but that's really not just about antisocial behaviour, that is a more wide-ranging issue with satisfaction in general about keeping victims of crime updated. There's an awful lot of work ongoing in relation to that. So in terms of the future then, clearly our focus on problem solving continues. Hotspots in the particular areas that we've got specific and identifiable problems, such as the issue at Wakefield that I've already spoken about. The mentoring, all the kind of things around place-based problem solving that you would expect connected to antisocial behaviour continue as we further embed the neighbourhood model.
Okay, thank you. Interesting report in terms of giving a picture across West Yorkshire regarding antisocial behaviour. I think in addition to some of the audit work mentioned in the report, how we're picking up on ASB incidents that we potentially don't get right for victims, both at a local and a strategic level. So,
at a strategic level, we have some software which we're working with Blue Star to further develop and refine the ASBAT tool, which makes sure that as a force and specifically as a neighbourhood team, we can pick up on a regular basis, not just longer term trends, but on a 24-hour basis, we can pick up when perhaps a patrol officer 24/7 has been to a particular job, hasn't realised the extent of the issue from a wider neighbourhood perspective. That then enables that neighbourhood team to pick that up and follow that up with the victim to make sure that we pick up on things where perhaps the first response has not been as wide-ranging as it could have been. I expect all of the neighbourhoods in the districts to monitor and review antisocial behaviour and our response to it, like I've just alluded to. And we've got our neighbourhood support officers in role now across the district, and again, they are another backstop in terms of monitoring the antisocial behaviour incidents, identifying threat, risk and harm, and then linking in with their neighbourhood colleagues about what we require. Problem-solving occurrences clearly are something that gets added to and picked up on should we feel that there's a need for a problem-solving occurrence. So I think, in terms of having a well-established neighbourhood model now, I think understandably sometimes when a 24/7 response officer attends something and they don't have that wider background information, that backstop of the neighbourhood and the neighbourhood support officers gives us a really good chance to go back in and do some service recovery and help pick that issue up to start to problem solving.
Okay, thanks. Did you want to follow up on the ASBAT?
So you mentioned the value of ASBAT in the report and this afternoon. I wonder if you could give us some usage statistics and possibly outcomes associated with the contribution of ASBAT to problem solving.
Yeah, I'm not off the top of my head.
No, of course not.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I'll take that as an action and I can
thank you.
that back through. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I was going to ask a question around the community trigger process, but I have to say I wasn't a huge supporter of this legislation or regulation when it came through, because I just think it was far too bureaucratic, and I'm not sure that even the local authority areas who were sort of taking this on at the time were necessarily convinced about the government's approach on this. But perhaps, are you aware of the numbers that actually take up that process somewhere?
I haven't got the numbers across the different local authorities, but that has been asked for, so when I get that number I will feed it back to you. But I know that corporate services have recently observed a trigger meeting at Leeds in terms of trying to understand the process and how bureaucratic it was or not, and whether it worked well or not. I think the feedback from that was that it was a very professional and structured system, and that there are a number of iterations that somebody has to go through once a victim makes that call in or writes in to say, I don't feel that this has been dealt with in a particularly good way. So there's a good process in place. I do think it takes a little time, and like I say, when we do have those figures about just how much it's taken across each of the districts, then I can feed that back in.
Yeah. When I last sort of asked about this, and I think even with our partners, the numbers were really low. It's a couple of years ago, but I wouldn't imagine they've changed very much. So I certainly take the view that, if somebody calls in around an issue around antisocial behaviour and they are distressed for whatever reason, then the community trigger process unnecessarily, in my view, just takes it to a threshold that is too high, because we should be acting on these things anyway before it gets to that level. But that's my personal view. In terms of nuisance bikes, yes, obviously aware of the issues around off-road biking and problems in actually all of the districts in certain areas and certain times. Could you just sort of elaborate a bit more on the DNA, the selector DNA in Wakefield, and why it's been so successful, and if it's going to be rolled out to other districts?
Yeah, so I think it's been successful at Wakefield because it's been deployed as part of a wider, more targeted operation because of a specific issue. So I do think in terms of size of district, Wakefield probably suffered disproportionately in terms of antisocial behaviour around off-road bikes, quad bikes, nuisance around that kind of issue. So it was absolutely right for it to be trialled at that place. Where this tactic comes in really handy is when we have an idea of who the person is. Clearly it doesn't help us trace an unknown person. But if very often, PCSOs who are aware of these issues in their communities know who it is, see somebody at the end of the street, if you're on a stolen or a bike that you shouldn't be on, are hardly going to wait for PCSO when they tell them to, and off they go. So actually, that tactic of being able to use the spray is really helpful. But it is only useful in those certain types of circumstances. So this is not something that's a solve-all factor for antisocial use of bikes across the districts. So yes, the other districts will have access to it. We can think about how we might use it not just for nuisance bikes but for other similar issues in communities. But as I say, it is relatively early days in terms of its usage and its evaluation, so I guess it's a bit of a watch this space really in terms of how we might use it in the future.
Yeah, it's just that within the report there's some really impressive outputs there. So, you know, if we're saying that calls have reduced on 350 to around 20 per month on this issue, well, that's huge. So I would have thought that, whilst I accept that coming from the Wakefield district, a lot of disused former pits and mine areas, and you know, it sort of lends itself a little bit more to that sort of off-road bike environment. Given the success, if that is to be taken at face value, then I would assume that it would have the availability of it, at least in the other districts.
The other districts have availability of
it.
It's just making sure it's deployed in the right way, in the right circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is available.
It is.
Okay. Also, you know, and partnership work is referenced throughout, and I've referenced it already. What do you see as the current and future challenges around maintaining the partnership around the ASB in the next couple of years? Or sorry, maintaining the attack on ASB?
There's probably two main things. I suppose resources and budgets in all areas, I'd say, is one, because you know, we know that when partners are in difficulty in terms of their budgets and resources, just when we have to make prioritisation decisions. So I think that element of making sure that antisocial behaviour stays high on not just our agenda, but local authorities and housing associations and other partners' agendas is really important. And then I suppose linked to that then is a wider element of prioritisation, in that we generally, it is our neighbourhood officers and PCSOs who deal with, in the main, longer term antisocial behaviour issues. And so we have to be really clear about our push to keep those people in those areas and not abstract them to other things which may, in the immediacy of time, seem like a bigger priority. And that's a really difficult balance to strike, I think. And it's an ongoing, we'll touch on it a little bit later in the neighbourhood report, but this is an ongoing balance about trying to keep people in communities doing what we want them to do, solving problems and reducing demand that way, with a view to then us not having as much to do with demand at the front end, but that demand keeps coming at the moment, and sometimes we just need to use our neighbourhood offices to service some of that. So it's that trying to strike that balance and prioritising, but keeping an eye on the longer term problem solving, I think.
Yeah, but that's why I like the reference to the pilots, because if we are getting some of those student officers, and as we know, we've got a lot of them coming in because of the recruitment, who are on patrol duties, to actually get upstream of some of that stuff, that in itself might prevent more demand.
Yeah, we need them to think problem solving as opposed to being people that get somewhere quickly and record crime.
Yeah. Jane? Yeah.
Just on the victim satisfaction, you've got a section, perception and satisfaction, but you've not included perception data, just to say we are very happy to share our public perception data around ASB, just to add to your data.
Yeah.
And on the satisfaction with being kept informed, I mean, it's an Achilles heel, isn't it? As you mentioned earlier, across victims as well as victims of crime as well as ASB incidents. But the data shows that we've got a less than 50% satisfaction rate with this area. Can you just help us understand the activity that's going into addressing that? Because it does often translate, doesn't it, into further calls for service, for updates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've literally just been talking about this just this morning at the local accountability meeting, and we talk about it at every local accountability meeting, in fact, in a different guise. So I suppose what I would say is, and this is an update in terms of satisfaction more generally, not just specific to ASB, but it applies just as much to ASB as it does anything else. So we have, as you would expect, a strategic plan around improving victim satisfaction, and that's across all of the areas, not just keeping people up to date. But as you rightly point out, keeping people up to date has always been policing, not just West Yorkshire's, but UK policing, I think, is Achilles' heel. So in terms of things tactically that we're doing to improve that, all of our call takers and our in that very front end of the business where people make that initial contact with us as a police service are being given ongoing and enhanced training about managing somebody's expectations in that very first instance. Sometimes, very appropriately, that might be the first and last time they have that contact about that specific incident, and that's the right thing.
Yeah.
We just need to make sure we say that at the time so that they're not expecting follow-up after that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that's the initial time that we speak to that victim very often, unless it's deployed to very quickly and an officer comes across the person first. So it's at that point that that initial needs assessment with the victim is completed, where we agree this is going to be an ongoing issue for more than this phone call, and therefore we strike a contract with people about how often they want to be kept informed about key issues. The victim contact card that we've just introduced probably 4 or 5 months ago for our officers as part of the investigations training is a really key part of leaving our victims with something that means something to them, and we're pushing our officers to be able to leave more meaningful details so that they can get back in touch without having to ring back onto 101, which, as you rightly point out, means that should in the fullness of time reduce that demand coming into 101 and make it easier for other people to get through who need to about things that they want to speak to us about. And we've got an iLearn package that is just about to roll out within the next few days. I've just done the introduction to it, which is a really interactive, very basic run through how, as an officer, we expect you to link in with victims. I do think we've got a big opportunity to improve this with improvements in technology, and those things are not that far away, whereby people will be able to go online and have a look at their own updates on things, or click on a button online and be able to take them through direct contact with an officer who might be on rest day, but we can come back to them when they're on. So I think it's just a general push to make sure that whilst there is a process in place to make sure we update victims, what that actually means is that in the middle of quite complex investigations, when everything else is going on, that we pick up the phone and speak to people, is the message that there's a real person at the end of it and we need to speak to them.
Yeah, and obviously the other opportunities there are around referrals to victim support, to the restorative justice.
Which is all on the victim contact card. Yeah.
So, because, obviously I often hear about the demand and the volume of calls coming through, but within that, I think you have openly recognised that there are some processes internally that we could better put in place that would automatically reduce some of that without, sort of doing too much else. So, that's a really important piece of work that we need to continually get the messages over to victims or people that come into contact with the police for whatever reason, that there are other referrals that can assist, that can take some of the unnecessary demand off the police.
And we're the best for victims, because we're the best one in the world, can't provide an ongoing counselling service to people, but actually victim support can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
sorry. Yeah, and as you said, Catherine, the inevitably some overlap with the naval policing report on this one, but nevertheless, antisocial behaviour is absolutely something that, as I said at the outset, the public do raise often, and a lot of our partners, councillors, MPs who make contact with yourselves and myself And some of the, whilst it is good to see some of the reductions in the recorded, sometimes that it doesn't feel that way from a public perspective, and I think that's just something we just always need to bear in mind as well. But I don't have any further questions, so many thanks for that update on antisocial behaviour.